Welcome to Get Your Spirit in Shape. I'm Joe Iovino.
I was called at 12 years old. But how do you tell people at 12 or 13 that you feel a call?
That's United Methodist Bishop Sharma Lewis of the Richmond Episcopal Area, who originally thought her call would lead her to a different career.
I then pursued medicine. I was a biology major. I have a bachelor's and a master's in biology, and I minored in chemistry, and I pursued that for years.
When applying to medical school, she had a conversation with her aunt, the Reverend S.E. Simmons, that changed everything.
I came home from college, and we went out to dinner, and she said, I really feel that you have a call upon your life. And I remember saying to her, not you too. And she said, what do you mean? And I said, do I have a sign on my head that says Reverend? People tell me that all the time.
I had a wonderful time meeting Bishop Lewis, and I'm sure you will too. I want to begin asking about your early life of faith growing up in Statesboro, Georgia.
Oh, yeah.
What are your earliest experiences with church?
Well, first of all, I was born and raised United Methodist. And actually, my United Methodist Church, Brannon Chapel, United Methodist Church in Statesboro, Georgia, was literally down the street from my parents' family business. And so it was in walking distance, so it was no excuse that we couldn't go to Vacation Bible School or Sunday school or even church. And so I was raised a United Methodist. What is always interesting for people to know about me is that I am actually the 14th pastor in my family. And there are several United Methodist clergy pastors that I've had the blessing to watch and follow in their footsteps.
Wow.
And
okay.
Yeah, so it's pretty. So as I tell people, I'm United Methodist through and through. I couldn't help but.
Did you? You said there are 14 pastors in your family. Were they contemporaries, or were they kind of like grandparents, or? Who can you give me
a little bit of both?
Oh, okay.
I can tell you. My grandfather, Reverend Vanderbilt Sr., who died before I was born, was a United Methodist pastor in what was called back then the Georgia Conference. A lot of people do not realize that in Georgia at one time only had, like one bishop. And but he served in the Georgia Conference because, now Georgia has North Georgia and South Georgia. I had an aunt, Reverend S.E. Simmons, who did serve United Methodist pastor in the South Georgia Conference. And then I have two uncles that served United Methodist in what's now called the North Carolina Annual Conference. And that was Reverend Claudie Simmons Sr. And in the family, we have United Methodist pastors, Baptists, Pentecostal, and Apostolic.
Wow, so you have some very deep roots, yeah.
Right, so I have very deep church roots.
Yeah.
But always raised in the church, love the church, really feel that I was called at 12 years old. I had a love and a passion for the church. But how do you tell people at 12 or 13 that you feel a call in a small town like Statesboro? Right. And so it was just something that, I just was very, very, very active and joined the church. I actually joined the church at 12 years old because there was an open invitation.
Right.
And believe it or not, my pastor at that time, it was an open invitation where you would literally walk down front. He would ask you to come give him your hand, but give God, as he would say, your heart. And I remember at 12 years old walking down the aisle, the center aisle. And what was interesting, the pastor, Reverend Bradley, he is now deceased. Instead of, as they say, inviting me into the church, he leaned over from the altar and whispered in my ear, did I know what I was doing? And I whispered back, yes, sir, I do. I've discussed this with my parents, but more importantly, I come to confess Jesus Christ as my personal Lord and Savior. And I want to live out my faith here at Brannon Chapel United Methodist Church. And so I tell people the rest is history.
I love hearing about call stories. Can you tell me, like, at 12 years old, what was the What led you to believe that you were being called into ministry? What was that experience
Well,
like?
I will tell you, at 12 years old, I had, as my mother would say, one of those old souls, as she would say, but I had a passion for the church. And people like Mrs. Amanda Smith and Mrs. Willoughby Williams and Mrs. Pearl Bellinger, who were like the mothers of the church, they were my Sunday school teachers, and there was just always something about when I would be with them or work with them. I was always excited about Christ, excited about doing things. And actually, Mrs. Amanda Smith was the first teacher who asked me to assist her in Sunday school. And she lived also very close to my parents' business. My parents had their first business was a convenience store.
Oh.
And so I would go over to the store, and then I would walk within a couple of blocks to Mrs. Smith's house literally every Saturday and help her prepare the Sunday school lesson. And then one day when I went over, she says, I think you are ready. And I think I was about 13 or 14. She says, I think you're ready to have your own class. And I was like, no, I can't have my own class yet. And so she's like, well, how about we start small? And I'm like, what do you mean? And she says, how about we start, I'll ask the pastor, can you teach your first vacation Bible school? And I taught my first vacation Bible school, I think when I was like 13. And it was just something about, it just clicked. It was like I love telling the stories of Jesus. I love working in the church. It was very natural for me.
Right.
And I really like doing more things from the church than just, I guess your normal things that you would do as a 13-year-old. When I reflect back on my life, I really do feel that God was calling and unctioning me at a very young age. I just didn't know how to interpret it.
Right.
And so my interpretation was you just, you be a Christian and you try to live your life as Christ-like. And I continue to do that. College, I was very active in the student Baptist. Believe it or not, I went to a Baptist school. I went to Mercer University, which is Southern Baptist, which people say, how did that happen? and I tell people how that happened is that they gave me more scholarship money, and they had this thing called Wonderful Wednesday. There were no classes on Wednesday.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so people would say, so that means you partied on Tuesday and Friday. But Mercer gave me more money. But as God would have it, even though I was a biology major, I was attracted to the religion department, and I took religious courses. I took Old Testament, New Testament. I took all of those courses. And I really do feel, Joe, that God was just continuing to form me, spiritually form me, and I just didn't realize. So I then, on my faith story or my call story, I then pursued medicine, biology. I was a biology major. I have, as you may have read, I have a bachelor's and a master's in biology, and I minored in chemistry.
Wow.
And I pursued that for years, but still active in the church,
Yeah.
And then after I graduated, I applied to medical school and applied actually 3 times. Mm-hmm. And every time, the first 2 times, I was waitlisted. I got on the waiting list and never got in. And when I applied to medical school that 3rd time, I had a conversation, which I tell everybody, was the critical conversation. It was a conversation at the crossroad, I call it. And it was a conversation that I had with my Aunt Essie, who at that time was Reverend Essie C. Simmons, Reverend Essie Simmons in the South Georgia Conference.
Oh, wow.
We had a conversation. I came home from college, and we went out to dinner. And she said to me in the conversation, I know you're applying to med school, and I said, yeah, I'm in the process. And she said, but I really feel that you have a call upon your life. And I remember saying to her, not you too. And she said, what do you mean? And I said, do I have a sign on my head that says Reverend? And she was like, why do you say that? I said, because people tell me that all the time.
Wow.
So she said, well, I think you need to listen to that. you need to discern that. You need to pray. You know, she was giving me all the things that you're supposed to do, as I call it.
Mm-hmm.
And so, believe it or not, Joe, I went through a period, I will say, of really serious prayer and discernment. And as God would have it, about a year or so, a couple of years after that conversation, literally on February 13th, 1994, at the 11:45 worship service at Ben Hill United Methodist Church in Atlanta, Georgia, I accepted my call to ministry, and Reverend Dr. Michael McQueen was preaching, and he was preaching the Ephesians 4 text. Some are called to be pastors, preachers, and I had been wrestling and had said, God, I'm going to this altar. I want to hear from you. I need to hear from you. I'm tired of people telling me. I'm tired of walking around with the reverend on my head and people thinking I'm a reverend. I want to really hear from you. And I went to the altar, honestly, and I knelt. And literally, I heard the voice of God as clear as I'm talking to you right now. Go preach my word. And I have been preaching God's word literally since 1994.
Wow.
What is also very powerful that I tell people that, you know, God will confirm. And the pastor at that time, he came to the altar, and I had spoken with my pastor that I felt I had a call but wasn't sure. And so when I got up from the altar and I turned around, believe it or not, half of the church was standing behind me. And so then the pastor at that time, Reverend McAllister Hollins, he said to me, do you have anything to say? And I said, matter of fact, I do. I have heard, I've been praying, and a lot of you have been praying with me, and I've been praying and asking God my next steps. And I said, I heard God's voice right here at this altar, and I want you all to know that I will be pursuing ministry in the next steps. And so that was February of 1994, and in September of that year, I started seminary.
Wow.
And the rest is history.
Right. Wow. So are there things, I'm just interested in the connection, if there is one, but between your studies in biology and chemistry, are there things there that kind of carry over that you apply, or things that you learned about yourself or about those topics that help you in your ministry?
Yes. Well, you know, I tell people that I really feel that God called me, you know, as I thought God was calling me into biology and also to medicine. I tell people that I really feel, you know, God utilizes everything. And that I feel like, you know, being called from biology to theology, not only do I work with the body, God is calling me to go from working with the body to working with the soul, as I say in theology, the soul. I think, believe it or not, that some of the connections is that what I've utilized in my ministry is that when I was a biologist, and I also worked in the area of biology and biochemistry, the key thing I would say is being observant. And I feel that within my ministry, I see things sometimes that other people do not see, and I think a lot of that has to do with just the way my eye was trained. You know, my cabinet tells me all the time, Bishop, you take a lot of notes. But in biology, that's what you do. You take a lot of notes. You're writing things down. You're writing in chemistry. You're writing formulas down. And so I do that. That is still very much a part of me, but I go back and I review it, and I say I see things. So I think the observant nature of a biologist I have carried over, because I find myself, even when I pastored, being very observant to people. And when I pastored, people would be surprised when I would share with them. I'm like, you missed church. And they were like, how do you know that? And I said, because you normally sit the same old place, the same old, you know.
Yeah.
And they would be shocked that I would remember that. I think that's the observant nature, I think, is one of the key things I really feel like I've taken. And then I'm, you know, as a biologist and chemist, you know, you do your research. And so I'm a type of person like that. I do, you know, if I'm looking for, when I was pastoring or even now as a bishop, when you're looking at different projects, I make sure that they are adequately researched. So I feel those skills, those attentive skills to ministry, the observant skills to ministry is what I got from the biology and chemistry.
Wow. Yeah, I love that. Another thing I read in your online bio was that you've led mission experiences in Jamaica and Kenya and the Philippines. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Jamaica was my first mission trip when I was at Ben Hill, and I learned a lot about young people.
Okay.
My first mission trip, in Statesboro, you do mission, but that's more in town. You're not really going abroad. So when I was at Ben Hill, and Ben Hill at that time was a very large church, I participated in my first mission trip to Jamaica, where we taught Vacation Bible School. And then the second year, the pastor allowed me to lead the team. I was a young adult, and I led the team in which, again, we taught Vacation Bible Study, and we also helped build the fellowship hall. When I led the team, it tested my leadership skills because I had to send two of my youth back home to Atlanta because they kind of slipped away in the middle of the night.
Oh, no, yeah.
To go into the city. And so, of course, I panicked and had to call my pastor, and we were doing bed check. And so I had to test my leadership abilities and also my discipline abilities. They didn't like it too well, and the youth didn't like it too well, but they had to understand that they were in my care.
Yeah.
And so I had to do that. My experience in Kenya was I had a wonderful opportunity to teach Kenyan pastors in what was called the Global Summit. I was asked by the Mission Society, who at one time, the Mission Society used to train missionaries for the United Methodist Church. The Mission Society now is called TMS Global.
Okay. And
it was during the time that Dr. Phil Granger and Dr. Dick McLean was president and vice president. And I had met Dick McLean, I can't really remember where, and he just saw my energy and passion for evangelism and mission and outreach, and invited me to be a part of the teaching team. So for 10 days, I was in Kenya with the Mission Society teaching other Kenyan pastors about outreach and mission and evangelism. And then my experience in the Philippines is when I was a district superintendent in the North Georgia Conference. North Georgia Conference had 6 bridges, or what you would call 6 initiatives with countries abroad. And Bishop B. Michael Watson, I was on his cabinet as a district superintendent, and it was an initiative, the 6 bridges, that came from during his administration. And basically how these bridges came about is that North Georgia Conference either had little or no connection with these countries. The 6 coordinators of the different places came to annual conference, and I met with them, and I connected with Bishop Rudy Wan, which now we are colleagues together, and I just connected with him and said to Bishop Watson that I wanted to be on the Philippine bridge. And so also at that time we had a Filipino district superintendent, so we partnered, and so we looked at the medical and dental area. We had a team that was at Wesley Seminary. We had a team, which was a team in which I was a part of, at Mary Johnston Hospital, which is the only United Methodist hospital in the Philippines. And so I did basically pastoral work and chaplain work while I was there for those 14 days.
Wow. Well, I'm shifting gears a little bit here, and this is a little more serious of a question, but when you were elected bishop in 2016, you were the first African-American woman elected from the Southeast jurisdiction. What does that mean to you?
Well, first of all, it was number one, I will tell you words like very humbling, honored to be the first. Of course, anytime you are the first, you blaze a trail, as I call it.
Right.
And I've also been honored by an organization of being a trailblazer. The thing that is powerful about that is that I did run in 2012 also and was not elected, and continued to pray and discern and ask God, if this is something that I do feel, will you continue to allow my path to be open? So in those next 4 years, it was not only praying and discerning and people praying with and for me. God allowed me in that 4-year gap between 212 and 216 to really get to know other people in the jurisdiction, because those were people who would be voting for you.
Right.
And so in 2016, I got elected in what was just, I would say, magnanimous. I got elected on the first ballot.
Wow.
Got elected with 71%, and you only need 60%.
Yeah.
I feel getting elected that I stand on the many, many, many shoulders of people who have gone before me, women, men, women who paved the way, specifically African-American women. A lot of people do not realize that in the United Methodist Church there are only 8 African-American women bishops that's ever been in the life of the United Methodist. One was Bishop Leontine Kelly, got elected in 1984. I feel a kindred connection because Bishop Kelly, was from the Virginia Conference. But unfortunately, as you know the history, she was not elected out of the Southeast. She got elected out of the West. And then 16 years later, we elected 3, Bishop Shamana, Fisher, and Linda Lee. And then 16 years later, there was Bishop Sharma Lewis, Cynthia Moore Kakoy, Tracy Smith Malone, and Bishop Latrell Easterling. So very humble and very honored that my colleagues, clergy and lay, saw that this was my next level of ministry in which to live out my faith. It is a very humbling experience to not only to be elected, but to be the first in your entire jurisdiction.
Wow.
So it's very special.
Yeah.
Very, very special.
Yeah.
Very special.
And I know being a bishop is a very busy job with lots of things going on all the time. But what do you do? What do you do to relax? Let's start there. What do you do just for the fun of it?
For fun, I'm your as I tell people, I'm your typical woman. I love to shop.
Okay.
Love it, and what people know about me, I love to shop for what? Shoes.
Oh.
I love shoes, and I love different shoes, so I'm a shoe shopper. So I do that, but also I'm a movie buff. I love movies, and I love to go to the movies a lot of times by myself. I am single with no children. So I tell people I go to movies because I need what I call mindless activity. And then of course I do work out in the gym, and as much as I can, read stuff for pleasure, not for work. Right. I do a lot of reading, and cool. And then of course I love being with my family. I have 4 older sisters and 1 younger brother.
One of the things I ask everyone that I have as a guest on this podcast is for a recommendation of something that we can do that will help keep us in touch with the Spirit moving in us. And what is something that you do that helps keep you in touch with your spiritual life?
I tell people I have a very, very strong prayer life. Mm-hmm. And I would say this is a movie. It's an old movie. War Room.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it came out a year or so ago. Mm-hmm. And I've always had prayer closets, but I tell people I have what I call my war room now, like the character on War Room. Yeah. But I have always had a very strong prayer life, and my prayer life. If you come to my townhouse right now in my prayer closet, you will see pieces of paper where if somebody will ask me to pray for them, and I will jot it down either on a piece of paper or a Post-it note. I have my cabinet names on this prayer list. Mm-hmm. I have my staff names. And so I'm very, very intentional in tune in praying. Praying for me keeps me grounded and connected with God. Yeah. Since I've been here in the Virginia Conference, I've been blessed to receive several prayer shawls. So I have them in my prayer room, my prayer closet, my war room. Yeah. And I keep those shawls in there because it reminds me that there were people praying for me. And then I pray for them. And sometimes, I've been in my prayer closet so long I've fallen asleep. So in my prayer room, my war room, literally I have the prayer shawls and I have a pillow. And I go into my prayer closet, but I tell people this closet, this war room that I have here is a little small, so every now and then I have to open the door, so I get a little claustrophobic. But I'll be moving in a couple of weeks and to a house, I have a big. I'm so excited. I'll have a big prayer war room. So I'll put names and different things that I'm praying about, scriptures that I remember to pray about, to recall. Have my Bible in there. I have my journal. I'm a journaler, and I journal. And so, but to stay in touch, praying, and of course reading scripture. But praying keeps me grounded and keeps me connected.
Wonderful. I can't tell you how much I've enjoyed this conversation. This has been wonderful. Thank you so much.
You.
Thanks for taking the time to do this. Thank you. That was United Methodist Bishop Sharma Lewis, the first African-American woman elected bishop in the Southeast jurisdiction. At umc.org/podcasts, you can read about Bishop Lewis, listen to more Meet a Bishop conversations, and find other fascinating podcasts to enjoy. We also would appreciate if you would review Get Your Spirit in Shape on iTunes. Excellent reviews help more people find us. Thanks for listening. We'll be back soon with another episode of Get Your Spirit in Shape, United Methodist Communications and UMC.org's podcast to help keep our souls as healthy as our bodies. I'm Joy Avino. Peace.